The ballroom smelled like old money and fresh polish. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls of light, casting everything below in a soft, golden warmth that made the metals on every chest glitter like small captured suns. The Fort Hargrove Military Gala was held once a year, and every year it carried the same quiet weight, a gathering of the decorated, the distinguished, and the deeply proud. Generals mingled with colonels, colonels laughed with senators. Everyone knew their rank, their place, and the invisible architecture of power that defined every handshake and every carefully measured smile. The evening was already 2 hours deep when she arrived. She came alone, no escort, no entourage, no car with government plates waiting outside to signal her importance. She simply stepped through the tall double doors at the entrance, paused for half a breath to take in the room, and then moved forward with the kind of quiet, unhurried calm that belongs exclusively to people who have nothing left to prove to anyone. Her name was Catherine Mercer. She was 53 years old, and she looked every single year of it, not in a diminished way, but in the way that old rivers look when you finally understand how far they have traveled. Her hair was silver-streaked and pulled back without ceremony. Her dress uniform was impeccable but understated. No excess, no decoration beyond what she had genuinely earned. Her posture was straight not because she was performing it, but because her spine had simply forgotten how to do anything else after 31 years of service. She had driven herself here in a rented civilian car. She had done it on purpose. There were days when Catherine Mercer grew tired of the spectacle of rank, tired of the motorcades and the aides and the way rooms rearranged themselves the moment her title entered before her. Tonight, she had wanted to walk into a room as just a woman in a uniform. She had wanted for one evening to simply be. She checked her coat at the entrance. She did not check her identification badge. It rested in the inner breast pocket of her uniform jacket, folded beneath the left side where a heart would be, close enough that she could feel its slight weight when she breathed. The room buzzed around her as she moved toward the bar. She ordered a glass of water with ice. She did not drink alcohol at formal events, a habit formed after watching too many good officers unravel at too many functions just like this one. She held the glass and watched the room with the slow, patient gaze of someone who had spent decades learning to read environments before entering them. She noticed the young soldier almost immediately. He was positioned near the main entrance corridor, standing at a checkpoint table where guest lists were being cross-referenced. He was perhaps 24 years old, with the kind of jaw that suggested he had never doubted himself a day in his life, and the kind of eyes that had not yet learned the difference between authority and arrogance. His uniform was crisp to the point of aggression. His posture was performative in the way that young men who have recently been given a small amount of power often carry themselves, like they are auditioning for a painting. His name tag read, Corporal D. Vance. Catherine noticed him the way she noticed everything, quietly, without expression, filing him away as a detail she might or might not need later. She did not expect to need him. She was wrong. It began with something small, the way most things do. A senior event coordinator, a civilian woman with a clipboard and the particular exhaustion of someone managing an event that is already happening, approached Catherine near the edge of the room and asked, politely but firmly, if she had checked in at the entrance desk. Catherine paused. She had not. She had walked past the desk without stopping because she had arrived late and the room was already full, and the desk had looked overwhelmed and she had not thought it necessary. She held clearance levels that most of the generals in this building were never going to see. She had not imagined that a guest list at a gala was something she needed to negotiate. She told the coordinator this, gently. She said she had simply forgotten to check in at the entrance and offered to walk back with her now to sort it out. But Corporal Vance had heard the exchange. He had been watching Catherine from the moment she entered, not because he had recognized her, but because she had not stopped at his table. In the particular logic of young men given temporary authority, this felt like a deliberate slight. She had walked past him. She had not acknowledged the process he was managing. And now she was standing in his ballroom, identified by nobody, verified by nothing, holding a glass of water and speaking to a coordinator with the calm, unhurried authority of someone who simply expected to be believed. He approached from across the room. His footsteps were fast and deliberate. "Ma'am." His voice was louder than it needed to be. Several heads in the nearby radius turned. "I'm going to need you to come with me and verify your identification at the entrance desk. You did not check in when you arrived." Catherine looked at him. She set her glass down on a nearby high-top table. "You're right," she said. "I didn't. I apologize for the oversight. I'm happy to check in now." This should have been the end of it. Corporal Vance, however, was not finished. Perhaps it was the way she had spoken, without apology in her tone, only in her words. Perhaps it was the silver in her hair, or the civilian quiet way she had entered, or simply the fact that she had not immediately shrunk when he approached. Whatever it was, something in him decided that this moment required escalation. "You don't have a lanyard," he said, his voice carrying just enough volume that a small cluster of nearby guests had now stopped their conversations and were watching. "Every verified guest received a lanyard at check-in. You don't have one, and I don't see your name on the entry log." "I arrived after primary check-in closed," Catherine said. She was still calm. Her voice had not changed its register by a single degree. "My attendance was confirmed through a direct channel. If you check your secondary list—" "Ma'am," he cut her off. His chin had lifted. There was something now in his posture that was not professionalism. It was theater. He was performing certainty in front of an audience that was quietly growing. "I've been managing this entrance all evening. I know who came through, and you did not check in. Without verification, I cannot confirm you're authorized to be in this space." A nearby colonel had slowed his conversation. A woman in a naval dress uniform had turned her head 45 degrees. The event coordinator with the clipboard had gone very still. Catherine looked at Corporal Vance for a long moment, not with anger, not with the particular cold fury that the situation might have warranted. She looked at him the way she had looked at 100 difficult terrain maps over the course of her career, with patience, with assessment, and with the deep, settled understanding that she had navigated worse. "Would you like me to produce my identification?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "I would." And then, before she could reach for her pocket, he added, "And if you can't produce valid credentials, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises. Or I will need to escalate this." He said the last part for the room. There was no other explanation for the volume. Someone near the buffet table had stopped serving themselves. Two junior officers had leaned close to each other and were whispering. The golden warmth of the room had taken on a different quality, not threatening exactly, but charged, waiting. Catherine's hand moved to her inner breast pocket. She did not hurry. She had spent 3 decades learning that the people most worth fearing were the ones who never hurried, and she understood the lesson intimately because she had become one of them. Her fingers found the edge of the folded identification card. She pulled it free with 2 fingers, unfolded it once, and held it flat in her palm, facing outward. Corporal Vance stepped forward to examine it. He looked down at it, and then something happened to his face that was almost painful to witness. It began at the edges, a slight stiffening of the jaw, a rapid, involuntary blink. His eyes moved across the text on the card once, quickly, the way eyes do when they are hoping they misread something. Then they moved across it again, slowly. Then a third time, with the careful, almost desperate attention of a man who is hoping the ground will shift and correct itself, before he has to accept what is standing directly in front of him. The identification card bore the seal of the United States Armed Forces. It bore a photograph of the woman standing before him. And it bore a name, a rank, and a classification level that made every piece of theater he had performed in the last 4 minutes collapse into something he was not going to recover from quickly. Major General Catherine Mercer, Deputy Commander of Joint Special Operations Command, clearance level, top secret/sensitive compartmented information. The card did not shout. It did not need to. It simply existed, flat and quiet and absolute in the palm of her hand, and it said everything that Catherine herself had not bothered to say. The silence that followed was not brief. It stretched across the room like a held breath. He heard it before he crossed the room. Commander Elliot Brask, the senior presiding officer of the evening. A 2-star general with 34 years behind him, and the particular stillness of someone who had long ago made peace with the weight he carried, had been in conversation near the far end of the ballroom when the charge in the air reached him. Not a sound exactly, more like a shift in pressure. He had learned to feel those shifts the way sailors feel weather changing before the clouds arrive. He turned. He saw the cluster of halted guests. He saw the young corporal. He saw the woman standing with her hand extended, something flat in her palm. He began to walk before he had fully processed what he was seeing. He crossed the ballroom floor with the measured pace of a man who has learned that running toward situations rarely improves them. His dress shoes were nearly silent against the marble. Guests parted naturally as he approached, not because they were asked to, but because something in the way he moved suggested that whatever was happening ahead of him was about to become his to handle. He reached the edge of the small, frozen gathering. He looked at Corporal Vance. He looked at the card in the woman's hand. And then he looked at the woman's face, and something moved behind his eyes that was not surprise. It was something closer to quiet devastation. The specific expression of a man who has just understood that one of his people has made a mistake that cannot be softened. "General Mercer," he said. His voice was low. It did not boom, it did not perform. It simply said her name and her rank, and in doing so, it detonated every remaining assumption in the room with the quiet efficiency of a charge placed by someone who knows exactly where the weight-bearing walls are. Corporal Vance turned to look at Commander Brask. His face had gone the particular pale of someone whose body has processed what his mind hasn't caught up to yet. "Sir," he began. Brask raised one hand barely 2 inches from his side. The gesture was nearly invisible. It was enough. Vance stopped speaking. Brask looked at Catherine. She had lowered her arm. She had folded her identification back into her breast pocket with the same 2 fingers, with the same unhurried calm. Her expression had not changed since the moment she had produced the card. She looked like someone watching weather pass. "I apologize for this," Brask said. He meant it. Every word of it was stripped of ceremony and full of something genuine. Sincerely, Catherine looked at him for a moment. Then she looked briefly at Corporal Vance, not with contempt, but with the measured consideration of someone deciding how much grace to extend and in which direction. "He was doing his job," she said finally, badly but earnestly. The words were not cruel, they were precise. And in their precision, they were somehow both the harshest and the most merciful thing she could have offered. Corporal Vance's throat moved. He swallowed. His eyes, which had carried such aggressive certainty 20 minutes ago, were now fixed somewhere around the middle distance between Catherine's shoulder and the middle of the floor. He was standing in the rubble of himself, and did not yet know what to do with the architecture of it. "Corporal," Brask said, and his voice was very quiet now, "you're dismissed from the entrance desk for the evening. Report to Sergeant Hollies." "Yes, sir." The words came out barely above a whisper. He left. His footsteps across the marble were the only sound in a room that had forgotten to resume itself. The guests, one by one, returned to their conversations. The music, which had not stopped but had seemed to, gradually reasserted itself in the room's consciousness. The chandeliers still burned. The metals still glittered. The evening still moved forward, as evenings do, indifferent to the human moments that erupt and dissolve within them. Brask stood beside Catherine at the edge of the room. He had retrieved 2 glasses of water. He had noticed she was not drinking, and he offered her one with a gesture that was free of rank or ceremony. Just 2 people for a moment, standing at the edge of a room together. "How long has it been?" he asked. "Since the last time someone tried to have me removed from somewhere I was supposed to be." A slight, dry pause. "Longer than tonight suggests." Brask absorbed this. He looked out at the room. "He didn't know." "No," Catherine agreed. "He didn't." Another pause. "That's worth something. It's not worth much, but it's worth something." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. It was the kind of silence that takes decades to build between people. A silence that does not need to be filled, because the understanding beneath it is already full. "Why did you come alone tonight?" Brask asked. It was not a challenge. It was curiosity offered quietly. Catherine considered the question with the same care she gave to all genuine questions. "I wanted to remember what it felt like," she said, "before all of this." She gestured a slight, open-handed movement toward the room, the uniforms, the gold, and the gathered weight of institutional power. Before it accumulated, before it became the thing people see when they look at me instead of the person underneath. Brask was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the particular gentleness of someone who has understood something painful without needing it explained to them. "And what did tonight remind you?" She looked at the room. Her eyes moved across the chandeliers, the metals, the careful architecture of hierarchy and belonging that filled every corner of the space. "That it accumulates whether you want it to or not," she said. "And that occasionally, the only honest response to that is to carry it quietly and let the room figure it out on its own timeline." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth," he said, "the room figured it out." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, something older and quieter than a smile. The kind of expression that a person earns only by surviving the particular cost of being chronically underestimated. "They always do," she said. Later, after the speeches had been given and the awards presented, and the evening wound itself slowly toward its close, Catherine stood alone for a few minutes on the wide stone steps outside the ballroom. The night air was cold and clean in the way that autumn air is when there is no wind to soften it. It pressed against her face and her hands and reminded her that she was physical, that she existed in a body that had carried her across deserts and into rooms, and through decades of decisions that had shaped lives she would never fully be able to account for. She thought about Corporal Vance. She thought about what he had seen when he looked at her. A woman without a lanyard, without an escort, without the visible performance of power that he had been trained to recognize. She thought about how reasonable his confusion had been, stripped of its arrogance. How the arrogance itself was not really his, not entirely. It had been handed to him. The way most arrogance is handed to young people who are given a small table and a guest list, and told that they are the authority of the evening. She was not angry at him. She had moved past anger towards something that took longer to arrive and lasted longer once it settled, something that looked, from a distance, like indifference, but was actually much more complicated. It was the understanding that she would spend her entire career being underestimated by people who did not have enough information, and that this was not a tragedy to be corrected so much as a condition to be navigated, and that the navigation itself, the quiet, patient, absolute navigation of it, was its own form of answer. You did not need to announce yourself if you were willing to wait. The world had a way of making the introductions eventually. She breathed the cold air slowly. Above her, the sky was clear and enormous, the kind of sky that exists over open country and military installations and places where human civilization has not yet managed to drown out the stars. She had grown up under a sky like this, in a small town in rural Virginia where nobody had expected her to go anywhere. She had sat on a porch steps very much like these and looked at a sky very much like this one and understood, somewhere below thought, that she was meant for distances she could not yet see. She had been right. The distances had been extraordinary. They had also cost her things she did not speak about at galas, a marriage that could not survive her absences, years her daughter had grown through without her present, a version of herself that had been left behind in each of the places she had been asked to go and had gone without hesitation, because that was who she was. It was the only honest answer she had to the question of what her life was for. She carried all of it. She carried it the way the river carries what flows into it, not fighting the weight, not pretending it wasn't there, just moving forward with it, letting it shape the current without stopping the water. Inside, the ballroom light spilled through the tall windows onto the stone steps, warm and gold against the cold dark. She would go back in a moment. She would find her seat for the final portion of the evening. She would accept the handshakes and the quiet, slightly abashed deference that the room would offer her for the rest of the night, because that was the part of the story that had already been written. But for now she stood outside under the enormous sky and breathed the cold autumn air and felt, for one unguarded moment, like the woman who had sat on different steps looking at different stars and understood something deep and wordless about what she was willing to become and what that becoming would ask of her. She had said yes. She had kept saying yes all the way to this night, this step, this sky. The stars did not care about her rank. They never had. They shone for the girl from Virginia and the major general in the same quiet, indifferent, perfect light. She thought that was probably the most honest thing in the universe. She breathed out once, slow and deliberate. She turned. She walked back toward the doors. The light inside was warm enough that she could feel it before she reached the threshold. She paused there for just a moment at the precise edge between the cold dark and the golden inside, and then she stepped through. The room received her without ceremony. She preferred it that way.